Great, thanks everybody. Welcome to a little bit of a webcast presentation today. It's just myself, Phil First, and four of my esteemed analyst leaders in the organization. And we just wanted to spend a little time with you today, taking us through our vision of the new dawn, what we see happening next year and beyond. We've done a lot of research, obviously, this year on what is going on, what is happening. We've got survey work that's literally just being completed and some data that we can share with you on that. And we also wanted to share a bit about our vision and why we see the world this way. We did send a document out just last week, which I know many of you read, and a lot of people liked it. It was long, but we put a lot of our thoughts down where we tried to be very honest and realistic about what we think is going to happen in the future. And we'll share a bit of that with you today. And then feel free to poke some questions in in your Q&A box, and we'll try and get to them as we go along, and also afterwards, which will be fantastic. Joining me, colleagues, many of you will know Saurabh Gupta, who's our Chief Research Officer, Lena Christopher, who's our SVP of Research, covers a lot of the banking spaces and automation areas that a lot of you hear about from her a lot. Tom Reuner, who's rejoined us this year, who leads our IT services practice. And last but certainly not least is one of our new hires, Don Ryan, who joined us recently from KPMG's management consulting research areas, who will be sharing some of his views as well on OneOffice and what's going on there. As we progress, there's your webinar host thing in the corner. You all know where that is by now, I'm sure. So we'll talk a bit about this new dawn and becoming a OneOffice organization. What does that mean? Tom Reuner's going to talk about the IT modernization trends we're seeing happening. Elena will pipe in around the Triple-A and why it's all about joining up the pieces, not obsessing on the parts. Don is going to talk a bit about this GBS kind of evolution towards OneOffice, and why we see it as an operating mindset for the future. We'll talk a little bit about the skills we need to ensure what we call this digital fluency interplay between business and IT, which is happening probably for the first time in decades. And then I've asked Saurabh, who's done some terrific research in healthcare. He's really actually become a pretty excellent expert on what's happening in that industry, particularly in the US, to talk a bit about how the tech and services industries can really, partner with healthcare organizations as we emerge from this crisis. And I think healthcare becoming such a critical industry moving forward from what we're going through today. And then we'll, if we have time, give you a quick update on our research agenda, and we'll obviously send that down to you anyway, so you can read it in your own time. And obviously we'll do some Q&A when we can get to it. So just a bit about our vision. We ran this huge study, which we completed about a month ago, and of about 400 of the Global 2000. And what you can see is only 37% of the Global 2000 are looking to return back to a similar office environment setup than they were pre-COVID. Most are actually looking at this more hybrid workforce as they emerge from this. So if you're selling products or services into industries which are shifting to a different model, you're going to have to change the way you operate yourself. You're going to have to change your whole model around servicing their needs. I think it's pretty clear we're not going back to the way we were. I don't think we're going to something completely different, but I do think we're going to a world where you do have to have the remote capability to service as well as the physical capability. But the physical capability, when it really comes back, I think is so important for training, development. People would like to go into the office 2-3 days a week. It's mentally good for all of us. I love the calls we seem to do these days. We all tell each other almost how we miss each other and cannot wait to actually see each other again and whatnot. So I think the socialist aspect will definitely come back, but a much more hybrid model with different types of travel, different approaches to work is absolutely happening. In terms of the impact on industries, we're in a world where this is all about redefining the boundaries of many of these industries because they're changing as we look at them. And this is the representation across the Global 2000 on how these organizations are faring with the impact of COVID. You can see the size of the bubble represents the impact on valuation. So the deeper the orange, the more positive, the more towards not being orange is the negative. You can see here banking has had a big impact, positive impact during COVID. I mean, in many respects, they were struggling to get past that last mile of digitization, and this really forced the issue for many of their retail customers. It's also really helped with becoming a fully fluid digital banking capability across banks. So it's been a a good experience for them so far. Life sciences and healthcare, not surprisingly, they're getting the spotlight they deserve as absolutely critical for bolstering society and helping us through times like this, which if we ever, God forbid, have to go through something like this again, we'll be a bit more prepared now on how to make sure our healthcare systems are set up for this and have the data they need to service this. And, I think, and I don't know about you, but all of us have done doctor's appointments now using video. And if it wasn't that easy, didn't that save me a lot of time and trouble? And they prefer it as well. So there's things happening which are really changing the way that we function in because of this. Industries which are, not surprisingly struggling. You look at obviously travel and hospitality. This is massively impactful for those industries and how they evolve beyond this, and how they function. There'll obviously be some resurgence in these industries when COVID does fade out, but habits will change. People aren't going to travel probably as much. People are going to do business in a much less travel-centric manner. I mean, we literally travel for everything, especially in our industry before this, and that ain't going to happen in as much as it did. Obviously, manufacturing consumer products, they get horribly hit during depressions and recessions. They really do, because lack of certainty, it makes it very difficult to predict what customers want and plan ahead. And obviously logistics and manufacturing have been suffering a bit too. And then in the middle, we've got industries like high tech and telco. Some are doing really well, some are struggling. It depends on this kind of have to have model. Do you have to have these products and services, or are they nice to haves? And then obviously insurance, that has been going fully digital for a while. It's in the spotlight because there's needs for new types of coverage, new ways of accessing that haven't been used before. Um, in terms of emerging technology, we started this massive study with KPMG before COVID, and then we paused it for a little while, and then finished it off about midway through the year. And what we did, we were able to compare the attitudes towards many emerging technologies as things evolved. So like process automation and AI, for example, went from more nice to have, cost reduction focused areas to something that's essential for future survival as we evolve. And Elena will expand upon this shortly. Analytics is in that essential category. Obviously, hybrid cloud, multi-cloud up there. Something like blockchain, which I think is going to have huge impacts, particularly in the supply chain areas. That's becoming something that can really improve competitive positioning, and I think will come back very significantly as we look at a whole new supply chain set up across the world. So that's a very, very interesting one to keep an eye on. And 5G has now become an essential capability with this need for remote bandwidth capabilities and many frustrations with what is happening with current infrastructures. On the positive side for the services industry, the outlook is actually quite positive post the pandemic period. Most enterprises are planning in the near term to increase investments in IT and business process outsourcing. And the impact this year, we're just finalizing numbers as we speak, has not been as significant as many analysts, including ourselves, predicted. We're looking at a smaller decrease in spend than the 8 to 10% that other analysts were putting out. We think it's going to be probably more like 2, 3, 4% decrease. So it has been a less than unpleasant experience than many of us are fearing earlier this year. There is a caveat I would add here. A quarter of enterprises are considering options. A lot of them are looking at doing more automation. A lot of them are looking at changing the makeup of how they operate globally. Some are going to be moving out of markets and things like that. So while there's good news that a lot of them are doing near-term planning to rely more on outsourcers, there may be some longer-term objectives of just changing their whole partnership model altogether. So on to our new dawn for bold enterprises. We've made the point, we think as this fog upon us starts to clear next year, we're going to have no choice but to look at this alignment of business processes and outcomes And it's all about how do we leverage the right enabling technologies to get really focused and creative about the markets that we're going to serve. We've really got no choice now but to really ensure that our staff are really embracing their what we call digital fluency, particularly with the onset of massive cloud adoption. Things are much more standardized. Things are much more focused around, less around writing code, less around tactical needs. It's much more, how do IT people become more conversant with business context, and how do business people understand how IT can actually help them scale, expand, and move into new markets, get better data to help them make decisions. So I think after 3 or 4 decades of having this divide between what came first, the process or the tech, they're now coming together. I think for the first time we're seeing this interplay, and that's actually pretty exciting. We've seen a lot of energized folks on both sides of the fence talking about they're working much more closely with technology now than they were. And moving on to this kind of mindset of OneOffice, and we think it's more of a mindset than anything else. You can go over the last 4 decades of our world, and we've gone from shared services, analog outsourcing, globalization. Basic digital hit about a decade ago with the onset of cloud, and that was all about responsiveness. How do we sell stuff online quicker than our competitors? How do we respond faster? How do we become a virtual modeled business? And then we talked about this wave of global business services, which is really the evolution of shared services to build out those centralized framework control functions to add a lot more value across the organization, to create hotbeds of analytics and strategy that can drive the organization. And Don will talk a bit more about that evolution. But we see the OneOffice as the connected way forward, because when we look at the last 4 decades, we're just really doing the same stuff a bit faster, a bit more efficiently, a bit cheaper, moving data around the company better. We weren't fundamentally changing how we did stuff. We weren't fundamentally addressing how we were designing processes to get to the outcomes we needed. It was more, how can we incrementally tweak this, tweak that to get it done a bit cheaper, a bit more efficiently. When we had to start addressing working in these remote organizations, that was an immediate forced transformation on us. We actually started having to look at doing things in a way that got our products and services to our customers more effectively, that serviced the needs of our partners and our suppliers and our staff in a way that got them what they wanted. So we now in a situation where we see enterprises making decisions much faster. There is a mindset of we've got to move, we've got to move, we've got to move. We actually now have that platform for change, and it's happening at various paces across the board. Obviously, it's not all, everybody's just jumping in the cloud, kumbaya, we're digital. That still ain't happening. We all know that. But this is the route to OneOffice. This is around having much more data-driven organizations, the realization that your strategy is the data that you get to make the decisions you need to make to stay ahead of your competitors. Your strategy is to be anticipatory and interactive and connected. That's what it's all about. This is the final phase of what we see as widespread cloudification, much more connected supply chains, much more data-driven virtual organizations across the board. This is the area where we're bringing the employee experience and the customer experience much closer together. We look at automation, which is about a discipline, it's a competency. You cannot move into the cloud if you don't automate your processes to operate in the cloud. That doesn't mean everything has to be on brand spanking new tech or has to be completely redesigned. This is about maybe getting your old systems to work better with your new systems. Hey, you can use some workaround tech like RPA for that. This is about unifying your data. This is about your customers and your employees operating in a very similar dual way in a digital environment. This is about breaking down the barriers between the front and the back. This is about being anticipatory. This is about predicting where you go before your competitors know where they're going themselves. This is what OneOffice is all about. It's about driving outcomes, having the mindset to do that, being less dependent on heavy people-centric processes and needs, and thinking more about the outcomes and the technologies that you can leverage, particularly in these hybrid setups, to be really effective at what you do. I'll just give you some examples very quickly, and we'll send this deck down. You can read them at your own volition of OneOffice, for example, on the provider side. I've given a couple of examples here. So Accenture were able to bring together a lot of its innovation capabilities by giving some of its clients the option of working with a startup partner of theirs versus Accenture itself, for example. And they were basically trying to bring in different units and capabilities to offer their clients more choice across all dimensions. That's something that we can share more details about. Another example is TCS, who've actually brought together their business process division and their cognitive business operations division into a single unit. So they're really catering for more transformational needs of their partners and their customers. By having much more siloed service provider deliveries, it makes it much harder sometimes to build together common policies, common practices, common experiences for clients. In terms of partnerships, these are absolutely so important moving forward. Wipro Ventures is an example here. They were established in 2015. I think Rishad Premji, the chairman's son, actually headed this up, and he passionately drove a lot of investment in mid-stage companies who Wipro could leverage to support in their solutions if clients wanted it, if it made sense. They didn't have to use CloudGenix or Headspin or these companies, but building out a series of partnerships across, exciting tech startups gave them a lot more capabilities to weave in the ability to take customers towards OneOffice. TCS Coin brought together networks right across the academia and corporate worlds as well to build out a very large ecosystem that they felt and has been effective at working with their clients. And they've actually got 50 university partners working with them on a day-to-day basis for helping them with innovation and development. And other models you've seen happening actually very recently. You saw a huge deal between Vanguard and Infosys. That was all about Vanguard trying to define how they do their record-keeping business. They really wanted to transform it, and they wanted real skin in the game, and had a lot of their executives move across to Infosys, for example, as part of this billion-dollar-plus partnership to redefine how they go to market. Volt partnered with TCS in the payment space, which is something about leveraging the TCS Banks platform. You saw Wipro and Alight have a very deep partnership pulled together about the health, wealth, and cloud businesses, and really working with Wipro's automation and machine learning strength to drive that globally. And then HCL and Xerox is another example where they've partnered now for several years, but they advanced that partnership recently where they could deliver managed services, arranging positions for many of the Xerox staff as well to deliver their shared services globally. So, and these are happening across the board. There's many more we're hearing about all the time. There's some being done now, but these partnerships between providers and customers are really taking off. And then when we get to the attributes as to what clients are looking for in this market now, and this was from 150 C-suite executives we spoke to in the last few weeks. What are they looking for in their business technology partners? That's going to give them confidence. They want to see awareness of the problem. They want partners who get what they get. They're not all looking at brand. They're not looking at the best of breed. Who can actually understand what we need and get us there fairly quickly, not particularly expensively, and will be with us as a partner. No one's actually looking for the very best. I think they're looking for somebody who can work with them. They're good enough. They can get them where they want to go, because people want to move fast. They don't have time. They need people to understand them. They also need to be able to leverage their creativity and their experience, and keeping an eye on the future and these types of things. This is where they're really looking to go with this. So I'll leave you with a couple of thoughts, which, and I have an old friend of mine, Josh Greenbaum, inspired me here, but he's in the software space, and he said the biggest mistake software vendors make is to sell products the way they build them, not the way they're consumed. And I'd always said this about the services space, is service providers, they make big mistakes because they're always trying to sell services the way their internal P&Ls are structured. They're thinking more about them. They're not thinking about building services the way their clients want to experience them. And the winners in each of these categories are those who really understand that shift. And those who, to be honest with you, haven't got this yet, probably out of the game. You need to really get ahead of how your customers want to experience and buy your products and services. So with that, I'm going to move to Tom Reuner, who's going to get into the IT modernization on steroids area. Over to you, Tom.
Thanks, Phil. Much appreciated. And given the title of the section is definitely a bit of a mouthful, but with the same token, you get a sense, or hopefully you get a sense, of the complexity that we need to keep at the back of our heads when we're discussing all the issues at hand. Yet most importantly, when we discuss the journey towards the OneOffice, as Phil just explained, IT must not just be an afterthought of the many unavoidable RPA discussions, but the foundation of the OneOffice itself. And that's almost a key point I'm trying to get across over the next few minutes. With this complexity in mind, a busy slide like this, unfortunately, and apologies for that, is probably unavoidable. And I have adapted this slide from our friends at Container Solutions, who are literally at the vanguard of advising clients of moving towards cloud native. And it's the best way to look at it. It's a maturity model that helps to discuss and visualize where clients really are on their endeavors, or in that case, of course, moving toward cloud native. Thus, to navigate that, let me call out just a couple of key points that are important to us. And despite all the marketing noise, the crucial point is that it's not about all the high technologies, but about culture, about people, about processes. And while it might sound trite, or at least to some, it really is about the journey all the way from the left-hand side to the right-hand side. And it entails all the issues that you can see in bold on the left-hand side. A key part of our job here at HFS is to provide realistic guidance where organizations are on their respective journeys. But while the marketing will always point to all the things on the right-hand side, the reality often, and I'll just take one point, many organizations are still stuck in waterfall, or at best starting to dabble around agile. And for many, cloud native is probably the ultimate goal, but literally it's some time away still there. But this fundamentally, especially if you talk about a journey towards cloud native, this is not just anymore about cost reduction, working from anywhere on VPNs. Rather, as suggested, it's predominantly about culture and people. And next slide. Let me double click on the one back, please, Phil. Thanks. Let me double click on a couple of issues to make it slightly more tangible and hopefully more relevant. A key element, for instance, of distributed agile is to enable cross-functional team working together. As such, it's fundamentally aligned with the journey towards the OneOffice with the intent to overcome all the silos. And that's the key point when we talk about the OneOffice. But actually, how do we organize the data, workflows, and the ultimate execution of process step in such environments? This goes beyond just enabling agile. This literally goes to the heart of operationalizing the OneOffice. And here we see new ecosystems, things like ServiceNow emerging. We are starting to see clients commencing projects traditionally in things like ITSM and ITOM, but then take the single data model in the dynamic workflows that ServiceNow offers and take it across to things like procurement, and we have seen it even corporate legal. And bingo, that's literally the journey towards the OneOffice being brought to life. And ITOM, so IT operational management, leads to the next points. For organizations to progress their journey toward the OneOffice, we literally need new approaches in enterprise service management and enterprise-wide service monitoring. At the moment, all this space, although it might be almost boring to some, it's a hugely fragmented space. And we see point solution of often AI ops, meaning artificial intelligence for IT operations, but all those approaches just help with narrow and highly specific requirements, but they're just not geared up towards cross-functional views that we need. But equally, we have to be really clear about all those bold statements on self-remediation, at times even self-healing, what they actually mean. And broadly speaking, what we see in the market, all these things are largely just about next back action, but not about self-healing. And when we think about literally about the journey towards OneOffice, what it means, that what we have to keep in mind and essential to the whole notion of operationalizing the OneOffice. And lastly, we have to be very clear what AI-driven product and service design really means. And again, there's such a noisy market around everything's called AI. And this has to be much broader than just statistical machine learning models. One example from a recent discussion with a client, for instance, Capgemini is experimenting with a digital twin concept to model complex process scenarios. But also my personal experience of having spent the last 2 years with Arago, one of the pioneers in AI, who have leveraged 20 years of basic research to provide unique process or automation capabilities, better to say. It's providing helpful insights. And for me, at least, this includes completely new almost ideas, things like a complete new set of algorithms that, for instance, blend machine learning and machine reasoning. but also these approaches yield much higher levels, if not unique levels of automation rates, because they're pushing non-deterministic ways of automation. And these are achieved by things where reinforcement learning is looking for the best possible solution. And suffice it to say, this is a far cry from all the mundane RPA discussion that we tend to have. Thanks, Phil. Next slide, please. And that's a segue for our thinking about almost operationalizing the journey towards the OneOffice. And apologies for yet another busy slide, but the journey is literally how we are overcoming all those silos, and not only front, middle, and back office, but probably more importantly for aligning IT and business. And yes, we have had discussion about business alignment for many years, but actually, if you're honest, very little progress has been made. But we finally have to move beyond all the siloed approaches. Thus, we are back to the discussion on cross-functional capability and automation. But we only make progress here when we have clear outcome in mind, what you can see on the top of the slide. And if your goal is just to link legacy application with your delivery or to enhance employee productivity, then yes, RPA is just fine. However, if you want to foster really this cross-functional experience that I was talking about, if you want end-to-end delivery where labor arbitrage is literally being phased out, and that's at the heart of all of that, then you need different approaches. In the end, it's about service delivery. And that's what I'm trying to get across with this slide. Next one, please. In the interest of time, there's a couple of pointers as to where we plan to take our IT service research agenda here at HFS. And as you can see, and hopefully will appreciate it, IT service is such a huge area to cover. Therefore, you see us much more focusing on areas that are strategically aligned to our focus areas and hope the ones you know everywhere. And the way I tend to position HFS to clients and many stakeholders in discussion, not least having just rejoined HFS, is that literally you're born out what used to be BPO and hopefully become a little bit the masters of big operational pieces around the big or horizontal back office processes. And by literally stumbling on RPA back in 2012, we hopefully have become the trusted advisors of how innovation or change agents, as we like to call them here in HFS, are changing that big operational piece. And with IT services, my suggestion is we play exactly towards our strengths. And a good example for that, if you look at the top left side, it's cloud. It's literally less about things like capabilities, be it Kubernetes, be something else. But as mentioned before, it's about culture, the people, and the processes. However, how actually clients moving that transition, it sounds so simple and trite, but it's complex. And similarly, containerization and microservices, are they really the holy grail of helping us to achieve reusable assets that can be moved across complex process landscape? It seems we have been before with SOA, and we have to almost think, are we making the same mistake? I think literally what it boils down to, I think what we should do, it's providing best practice and convey the learnings from all those engagements. In particular, we need a robust understanding of which workloads have moved to the cloud, but equally which ones, and we have to be clear and honest about it, you see workloads moving from public cloud to private clouds as costs at times are exploding. Equally, we have to understand which work are much better suited to environments like bare metal. So again, we need much more clarity in all of that. And I'm really delighted that we have a new colleague, Joel Martin, starting next week, who will drive our cloud coverage. So stay tuned for that. Moving to the next cluster, application development as it used to be in the old days. We have much more stronger focus on distributed agile. And again, you might have seen our research during the year already. But again, it's about the operational piece and the innovation. But actually, how do you make, and it sounds so simple on one hand, but how do you make something like agile work in complex engagement, such as outsourcing? And a similar mindset applies to the broad segment of testing services. Thus, around testing, the focus is much more testing of innovation, but also to give a sense to know how is this innovation is infusing the offerings. And lastly, and very close to my heart, also know me more from my previous work at HFS, a push to much more IT-centric flavors of automation. Think about things like continuous configuration automation or workload automation that become ever more relevant the more organization progressing toward agile or even cloud native. And the common denominator is how do we get cross-functional workloads and automation. That's really smart what we're trying to play back. Or the other way, I'll try to describe it, how do we somehow move to operationalizing the OneOffice? Thus, you will see us assessing automation approaches that are not non-deterministic in nature, all the way on the right-hand bottom. And the last slide, please, Phil. And just to bring us down to earth, might have been slightly abstract. Just here is more data from the same study Phil was presenting, so I was roughly 2 months old. And just to give you a set on the left-hand side, the intent on spending of organizational IT service. And if you cast your memory back to almost the depressing days back in March, in April, where we saw literally the world is coming to standstill. But if you look, about more than 70% of organizations expect to increase their IT spending, and some of them are even by some 12%, by 20%. So, and you might have even seen today the earnings by Accenture. So I think we move beyond this trough of depression. And if anything, IT service is one of the conduits of combating all of it. If you look then about the technology, about the issues clients have in mind to the right-hand side, probably not surprisingly, the more we get to end-to-end deliveries, the more we accelerate the journey towards cloud. Cybersecurity is coming out as a key issue. There are many issues not being reported, but you know from your own personal consumer experiences how important that an issue is. We saw the outage of cloud just beginning of the week, of Google just beginning of the week. And you see top of mind what I talked about is literally cloud core IT modernization. And with that, I very happily hand the baton over to my brilliant colleague, Eleanor. Eleanor, all yours.
Sure. Thanks so much, Tom. A lot of just real exciting focus areas that Tom has planned for HFS and our IT services coverage in 2021. One thing Tom and I will be collaborating on is looking at automation. Tom referenced a couple of times RPA, and we have to get beyond RPA. Hallelujah to that. But one of the things Tom and I will collaborate on in 2021 is thinking about how automation, it's not just for the business, it's not just for IT. Increasingly, and we see this, we see the factions, so to speak, coming together, and it becomes about automation for the enterprise. And that's so inherent to our OneOffice value proposition. I'm going to talk with you about an important HFS concept called the Triple-A Trifecta. What the heck is the Triple-A Trifecta and why does it matter? So Triple-A Trifecta is HFS speak for the intersection of 3 critical categories of change agent. The first being automation. You'll see our handy dandy Venn diagram to the right. So the first A, so to speak, is automation. We give you some examples here of the type of tech that falls into there. But ultimately, the superpower of automation technologies is to help increase efficiency and productivity, get rid of a lot of that horrible manual process debt that we've all compounded over the years to allow our back office systems to live another day. Automation is category 1. The second A is artificial intelligence, or AI. Its overarching superpower, so to speak, is that it solves business problems. We've given you some tech examples there. We see so much of AI used in its own right for small, incremental, interesting solutions. But part of the whole point here is that when you start to use it in combination or in collaboration with other change agents, you can do more with it. Last but not least is analytics, increasingly smart analytics, as you see this sort of bleeding together of AI and analytics increasingly. But the analytics superpower is to improve decision making. We've given you some tech examples there. So these are all undeniably categories that are wildly important and valuable in their own right. But starting in about 2017, when we first launched this concept of the Triple-A Trifecta, our strong assertion was and continues to be that while valuable in their own right, they're even more so, potentially exponentially so, when used together. And it's really these types of technologies combined with some of those OneOffice fundamentals that Phil mentioned in his comments that really start to help enterprises push towards this concept of the OneOffice. And it's not so much the breaking down of the physical silos. Many enterprises out there will no doubt continue to have organizational structures like finance and accounting, customer service. But think of this as enabling and improving how work gets done, enabling the workflows with this enabling set of technologies to allow workflows to go across the various silos, to create those collaborative and cross-functional teams that Tom referred to. This is the heart of what the Triple-A Trifecta is all about. It's almost, it starts to be in some of the examples we see in the marketplace today, almost sort of a baby OneOffice, so to speak, or really the starting point for enterprises that are on their journey to really embracing digital and becoming a OneOffice. I will point out, because we will share these slides with you after the webinar today, just my bottom bullet point here. We actually, I mentioned we introduced this concept of the Triple-A Trifecta in 2017. We did our first ever Triple-A Trifecta services top 10, where we evaluated 21 service providers about how they're helping their clients, as well as their own internal operations in many cases, bring together these three incredible change agents to help drive value and benefit for their clients. So we've got the link for you there, something really interesting to check out. Let's go to the next slide then, Phil, because this is not, I want to share a little bit of data with you, because this isn't just a nice notion that HFS has. We truly see enterprises starting to increasingly understand the value and the benefit of the intersection and the potential to go exponential, as I mentioned on the prior slide. So for a study, we do a couple of different annuals, studies and thought leadership research initiatives with KPMG. One we did this year is what fueled these two pie charts. If we start with the one on the left-hand side, we had asked 600 enterprises throughout the Global 2000 what they thought about the combined use of emerging technologies. Were they finding that you get more value and benefit from what we like to call the power of and versus using these technologies in isolation? So what we see on the left-hand pie chart is 64% of our respondents said, heck yeah, we're definitely seeing greater value and benefit from the power of and using the Triple-A Trifecta, as well as other change agents, because you do find they start to work in concert, but other elements like cloud are definitely starting to join the party, so to speak. I will point out it's just 8% said they disagree or strongly disagree. The other big faction here are those that are neutral. Our read of this data is that those that said neutral just simply haven't had the opportunity to formulate an opinion yet. So it's not so much they disagree, because they would have said that. They're just really biding their time until they have more of this integrated Triple-A experience. On the right-hand side of this chart, we see the sort of what we view as the product evolution in the marketplace today, because we asked a question, which is, is your experience as an enterprise that these technology categories are starting to converge together, trying to make it so you don't have to perpetually be building this yourself? Like you've got your widget kit that you're combining all of these different technologies. The marketplace is, of course, taking notice. And of course, the different software providers that are out there are increasingly bringing lots of these functionalities together. Honestly, at the vanguard of this type of initiative, and this was very much what was reflected in that Triple-A Trifecta top 10 for services that I mentioned just a few moments back, is that so many of the service providers are actually, they're building these types of Triple-A and beyond platforms to help better enable their own operations, as I mentioned, but above all, to bring enhanced value to their clients. You see Accenture doing this with their SynOps platform, Wipro with their Homes platform, Infosys with NIA, KPMG with Ignite, Genpact with their Cora portfolio, TCS with their Digitate Ignio platform, et cetera, et cetera. The service providers, who are always a sort of a mirror to what the greatest needs are in the marketplace, are really responding and building some of the most compelling productized, delivered as part of their services experience. You also see the product community responding. I mean, just looking at what we used to call BPM providers, which are increasingly low-code, no-code providers, But folks like Appian, Pega was actually first to the party, but then Appian and now Highland Software adding RPA into their portfolios. If you look at any of the RPA software vendors, they continue to add, whether it be through their own organic growth or through merger and acquisition activity, adding in functionality like process mining and process intelligence, building better analytics, bringing intelligent document processing into the mix so you can better handle and structure data. And then you also have really interesting new participants coming into the market. Phil had up a couple interesting slides of some of the new types of emerging technology partners that are actually forging interesting partnerships with some of the service provider community. We see a lot of these, like a couple of that have crossed our radar screen of late is the firm Sirocco that's bringing together process intelligence and process automation and intelligent document processing, or folks like Workato, who are most known for being a integration as a service platform, but also have a really strong process automation engine. You're really starting to see these almost sort of platypus-like interesting combinations coming about. Let's go to the next slide, Phil. And it's not just the interesting combinations of tech. It all comes down to, I mean, honestly, I think I've probably said 1,000 times, it's while the tech is enabling, it's all about what the tech does. So this very important question that we also asked the same sample of enterprises was, well, are you actually getting greater value from the so-called power of and? And while we assess this across a baseline technology, because you don't get to the, increasingly we see enterprises and a lot of those solutions are helping firms get to the Triple-A, but very often you start from one vantage point. So that's essentially what this data reflects. But those enterprises who believe in the power of and, the orange bars here show that they're receiving much more tangible value from their investments in emerging technologies than those where the jury is still out or they disagree with the power of and. So there's a real value proposition here, a real value connotation to what's the difference between a singular or piecemeal approach to using tech and that of bringing it together and leveraging it as a means to help your firm on its journey to digital transformation and on the path to the OneOffice. Let's go to the next slide. I'm not going to go too deep into this one because I've got some other colleagues who have very interesting things they want to share with you. But I just want to mention that always in an effort to contextualize where we're seeing the Triple-A Trifecta really take hold, as part of that top 10 study I mentioned, we ended up with more than 180 case studies from the service providers that participated in our study that showcase different examples of Triple-A Trifecta in action. And very interestingly, the top of the stack were industry-specific examples. And just what's incredibly exciting about this is that industry-specific examples get to the heart of what your core business is. If you're a bank, it's things like some of the examples I hear, payment investigations, card services, account services, settlements, fund accounting, fraud detection. These are the heart, the lifeblood of your business. And so this starts to put us on that path to the OneOffice, where the technology is enabling changes and really pushing firms to enable automation and the Triple-A to be native components of how you actually get work done. So let's go to the last slide, Phil, please. So where are we today and where are we going? So this has been a slide I've used for a couple of years now. I affectionately call it the flashlight, but we just like to put that stake in the ground of where we see enterprises today. And we're very much in that transition of going from piecemeal tech to something that looks a heck of a lot more like the Triple-A Trifecta. But that's it's a technology vision. And so I always like to go sort of to the end of the flashlight where the aperture is most fully open and we're getting the best of the light, so to speak. We're calling this now native automation. I just used that phrase a couple of moments ago, but the point that we want to make with native automation is that it goes well beyond just the tech. Like I said before, the tech is enablement. The parts that have to be done, and this gets to how all of you can make, every enterprise out there can and should make automation and the Triple-A Trifecta technologies part of how you get work done. It needs to be a native component of your enterprise DNA. And that involves a heck of a lot more than technology. That involves people. Phil mentioned increasing digital fluency, all of us, not just those in technology, all of us need to understand how we can do work better and leverage those tools. Improving processes. I used the term process debt earlier in my comments. This is our heritage of continuing to leverage our legacy systems and just band-aiding ways to get work done so that those systems can live another day and we can actually close our books at the end of the month, the quarter, of the year, et cetera. There's so much process debt out there. We really need to reevaluate and reinvent the most important processes so that we can get to those cross-functional teams. And that starts to help break down our silos. Because I'll submit to any of you out there, when you really look at any of your core business processes and workflows today, they do not exist in silos. And so you can keep your organizational silos, but we need to allow the workflow and the processes to flow across those silos so that you can run your business better. We need the Triple-A stack, as I've already talked about. We need data to underpin all of this, because if you're not making effective use of your data, people aren't going to have the right information. You're not going to be able to take the right decisions. And last but not least, it needs ongoing pervasive change management, not just organizational change management, not just IT change management or any other permutation of change management. It's an ongoing process to make sure that the change that is taking place is well communicated, well understood, and that everybody's on the same page, so you can truly take automation and the Triple-A Trifecta and make it a native part of your organization on your road to the one office. All right, that's my bit. Thank you. I'm now going to hand over to my colleague, Don Bryan. Over to you, Don.
Hi, thank you, Elena. I want to take 5 minutes to explore the relationship of legacy operating models like GBS and the new mindset of OneOffice. The potential death of GBS poses the question on whether legacy operating models are equipped to handle the requirements of work from anywhere and a laser focus on enhanced experiences. Basically, a rethinking is taking place, magnifying customer, employee, and supplier experience, and really to get people what they need. Trends have been emerging even before the pandemic that underscored the need for a new mindset in working across back, middle, and front office. The hyperactivity of the last 6 months has brought about a reckoning of how organizations create and deliver value, notably to how shrink organizations and make them less complex while delivering transformational outcomes. HFS will be exploring these themes in 2021 as companies restart engines with new perspectives on the importance of all parts of the enterprise to drive business outcomes. The OneOffice mindset aligns perfectly to these changes in thinking. Next slide, Phil. Recent research shows that while, could we go back? Thank you. Recent research shows that while cost reduction is essential, the focus now is on surviving and thriving in the post-pandemic shock. COVID-19 has changed our business philosophy, accelerating the already important trend of scaling digital initiatives, and has started the search for a new wave of cost reductions. This is outlined in research that was recently done in the second quarter of 2020, most notably at a pace traditional operating models like GBS can't deliver. Add to this the emphasis on enhancing experience across the value chain, and the sacred cows of how we work are being taken out to pasture. And this trade-off between experience and efficiency initiatives will continue to be underscored. Both user organizations, as well as service providers are really trying to balance these things. And investments, there's going to be trade-offs in investments over the next 12 to 18 months to emphasize either one or the other of these. Next slide. Advancements of technology are pushing boundaries of value creation. The operational journey for delivering services started 20 years ago with the rise of shared services and outsourcing. It evolved into GBS, driven by end-to-end process delivery, and it's now culminating in OneOffice. Organizational silos around front, middle, and back office are collapsing to create boundaryless organizations focused on business outcomes. Importantly, the mindset and flexibility of applying OneOffice can enhance delivery regardless of the operating model. This we think is very critical, where the OneOffice concepts can really be applied whether you're in a centralized, decentralized, or functional model. So that the value that is normally derived from GBS, such as end-to-end process efficiency, can now be realized in different types of operating models that aren't quite as top-heavy. So this is all made possible through automation, as I said, obviating the need for top-heavy, people and process-centric organizations like GBS. Indeed, GBS, from research that we've done, grew from 5% to 11% between 2016 and 19, but we've seen little movement since then. And many companies that we work with are actually moving away from these GBS top-heavy models to more decentralized and functional delivery, using, again, the concepts, tools, and mindset of OneOffice to achieve this end-to-end process efficiency. Next slide. So to conclude, GBS is no longer the North Star. Indeed, major companies, as I said, are moving away from this model, and we think they will continue to do so at a rapid pace over the next year to 2 years. To help companies navigate this change, HFS has developed a maturity and readiness assessment that evaluates the specific levers to drive to the OneOffice. We organize this around the key principles of talent, digital architecture, change management, data and strategy, and map companies on a 5-stage journey of maturity. We'll be incorporating this in all of our market analysis next year, and we'll make this available to our clients to benchmark their current state and their progress to the OneOffice. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Phil.
I'm going to get on to the healthcare industry and some of the exciting things that we're seeing there. And I'm going to ask Saurabh to lead us off with this. I'll just advance the slides to the right place for you, Saurabh, and then we can get moving with this. So there we go. Fantastic.
All right, thanks. Thanks, Phil. So if we move to the next page, look, I think we all have discussed a number of different dimensions, from the OneOffice to the role of IT modernization to emerging technologies across the Triple-A Trifecta, the operating models and whatnot. Well, let's look at it from an industry perspective, and what better industry to look at than healthcare? We've all become healthcare experts this year, given what we've seen. But if you look at what's happening in healthcare, the demand for healthcare services is outstripping the supply, and still the overall consumer confidence is, extremely shaky. If you look at data, by 2050, in another 30 years, 1 in 4 people living in the Western world, in Europe and North America, would possibly be over 65 years or over. So demand is, exploding. And healthcare spending is rising like crazy. If you look at US, for example, US spends a whopping 17% of their GDP on healthcare. And that's increased from, if I remember correctly, from 12% at the start of the decade. So in just a few years, we've increased 5 basis points on GDP in terms of healthcare spending. And yet the overall consumer confidence in this is perhaps at an all-time low, right? And when I was looking at some data, and the consumer confidence in healthcare affordability here in the US is, on a scale of 0 to 100, is at 24. That's abysmal. And then what has happened with this pandemic shock is that COVID-19 has exacerbated these challenges. Our research suggests that nearly 70% of the healthcare executives, believe that COVID-19 will impact the industry in a much more significant way than, what the financial crisis of 2008 did. and the providers are at the center of the storm. The hospitals and the doctors, they don't have any visibility into their future revenues. Elective procedures have been, pretty much impossible. Uh, the pool of healthcare practitioners is shrinking, and that's increasing costs. And if you look at the payers, with all of us entering a recessionary economy, the premiums, are we going to be able to afford our healthcare premiums? Look at the unemployment numbers. There's a lot of macroeconomic volatility out there that's going to impact this sector. So there is a dire need to drive resiliency compliance in an increasingly sort of volatile world. So if we move to the next page, Phil, what do we see as the major innovations in industry? And they're completely aligned to this trifecta of challenges that we see in the healthcare industry. On one hand, you need to reduce the cost of care and somehow increase the supply. And what we are seeing is the ecosystem starting to come together. If you look at the healthcare ecosystem, it's a very complicated ecosystem. You've got healthcare payers, providers, pharmacies, life sciences, government, benefits, players, etc., etc. And honestly, pretty much everybody hates each other in the industry, right? The payers don't like the providers. Nobody likes the life sciences firms. Government changes its minds pretty much every day. I think one of the big initiatives that's happening at a macroeconomic or a political stage is trying to align the incentives of stakeholders. And we are seeing vertical integration happening. We are seeing the emergence of what we call payviders, healthcare plans starting to provide insurance to their consumers. We are starting to see, cost optimization to reduce the cost of care. We've seen touchless claims now starting to be injected. There's a big shift towards as a service models. BPaaS is starting to become hugely important. And then we are finally starting to see, both payers and providers and life sciences firms start to optimize their broken processes by leveraging, the Triple-A Trifecta that Alina was talking about. I think the second big shift that's happening is, if you want to manage the demand for healthcare, you've got to shift the mindset from illness to wellness. And we are seeing a huge uptick on telehealth services, which is essentially virtualizing care, be it remote care, be it home care, and technologies are playing a very important role. Who would have imagined 2 years ago that Amazon, Apple, and Google will be healthcare companies? If you start to look at some of the biggest healthcare insurers, they're starting to encourage health and wellness. And that's again powered by smart analytics and AI. And patient experience is at the center of healthcare. Whether you're a payer, provider, life sciences, it's all about the consumer experience, which needs to be unified and seamless and has to have a digital front door. And then last but not the least, you've got to drive resiliency and compliance and manage risks, right? And that's where we see data and privacy and security to come at the forefront. As Tom mentioned, you look at healthcare, and the modernizing of legacy health systems is an imperative right now. It's a must-have. It's no longer a nice to have. And we are seeing huge amounts of investments in there, both in terms of cloud as well as cybersecurity. You look at the supply chains have been hugely impacted in the healthcare industry. Every pharma company today imports huge amounts of APIs or active pharmaceutical ingredients from China and India, and nobody has a clue on how much of that is getting imported, right? Real-time visibility, transparency, resiliency of the supply chain, and traceability are hugely important issues. And regulatory compliance. Next year, we're going to be in a value-based care is a regulatory requirement, and so will be interoperability very soon. And how do you sort of deal with these things? So I think if you start to look at what we've been talking about in this webinar so far around the OneOffice, around IT modernization, around the use of emerging technologies through the Triple-A Trifecta, or around what Don was talking about, looking at the operating models, healthcare is the perfect storm to where we are seeing all of those things starting to happen. And if we move to the next page, patient centricity is at the heart of healthcare transformation. And how do you build patient centricity? That's where our OneOffice concept really comes into play. You've got to remove the silos between front, middle, and back. And not just that, for the healthcare sector, we've got to figure out how do we align the incentives across the different stakeholders in the healthcare ecosystem to really make this work and to really make this patient centric. So with that, let me just spend a couple of minutes on our exciting developments for next year's overall research agenda. Look, I think if you look at our mission as a research organization, what we are trying to do is look at all these change agents, which are emerging technologies across the Triple-A Trifecta: cloud, IoT, and blockchain, and start to understand what's the impact on different functions, whether it's business services or whether it's IT services, and specific industries. And that's really what we are trying to do. I think what's extremely important is also to start to figure out what are the new delivery models that are coming in. And we've alluded to some of these trends in terms of localization of talent, work from home, crowdsourcing, new commercial models like as a service, and under the umbrella of the OneOffice. That's really what we are trying to do, and we'll continue to do that in 2021. I think our engagement model, if we move to the next page, is we don't want to be, a behind the firewall kind of an analyst. We want to be out there working with our clients, hand in glove, helping them in whatever way we can support them. And that's where our engagement model looks at these, moves from providing insights through all our research, but also be a sounding board for our clients, right? In terms of providing workshops, in providing dashboards, in terms of helping them figure out what could be avenues of inorganic growth to start driving impact, through our events business, around digital roundtables, webinars like this, podcasts, and then finally, thought leadership. And one of the things that I really that I'm super excited about for next year is this OneOffice Pulse. And I feel you can move to the next page. This is something that we are extremely excited about because we're launching this new series of products in 2021 under the umbrella name of OneOffice Pulse. And the whole idea here is that, look, the market is moving extremely fast, and most of the research houses sort of look at supply side data, but supply side data has a lag effect. You can't really given the pace of movement of changes that are happening, you can't really rely on supply side data alone to predict what's going to happen, because that's already being reactive. So what we are planning to do is every 6 months reach out to our enterprise clients, about 800 of enterprises, the global 2000 enterprises, understand from them what's their readiness and their journey towards the OneOffice. What's their outlook towards using emerging technologies and business services? What's their outlook for their particular industry? And start to understand where the market is headed. Every 6 months, we will also focus on a specific theme. The first one is going to be focused around cloudification, given how important that has become post the pandemic shock. And then this OneOffice Pulse will be available to all our clients in terms of access to the data behind this, but also access to HFS analysts as being a sounding board as they start to develop their own go-to-market strategy, as well as how do you consume and consume some of the IT and business services. So I'm super excited about this. The last thing that I'll mention before we get into Q&As is, if we move to the next page, is we are also looking at evolving our top 10 reports. If you look at the top 10 reports that we've been publishing for a few years now, we've taken the bold step of ranking providers, not just putting them in 2x2 grids. And we've been ranking providers across a series of dimensions around execution, innovation, and voice of the customer. But starting next year, we're adding a new dimension, which is alignment to the OneOffice. Given how important OneOffice is becoming, it's becoming almost like a have-to-have capability or a have-to-have mindset. We need to start to align our top 10 reports to that. So a lot more to come. 2021 is going to be exciting. We are glad to be analysts in the IT and business services space, because I think we are living in a world where we need to do a lot more with a lot less. And I think our industry has all the toys and the tools in the toolbox to make that vision a reality. So with that, I'll pass it back to Phil, and maybe we can answer a few questions.
Thank you, Sarah. And I should know better than to organize a webinar with 6 of our most talkative analysts, and myself. I'm completely to blame as well here. And we've gone way over the time, but hey, this is free. We're having some fun, right? So I really appreciate everyone joining. I'm going to see if we've got time to do a couple of questions, but I know Elena and Kirby have been very busy answering them as we've been going through this. So there's a lot of people who've been asking about readiness for enterprises to move to OneOffice. We get this question all the time, and we're working very hard to build out examples of this. I think the first thing to share with you is that OneOffice is a mindset. It's not a framework. It's not really a model. It's a mindset that you need to get to, where you're not completely dependent on armies of people in centers to deliver work all the time. They're much more spread out. That's the first thing to think about here. It's not about the old model of GBS, where it's very centered on these expertise centers. It's more centered on the expertise is distributed right across the globe, wherever you get those skills, for example, like that. That's the first thing to think about. We talked a bit about service providers who are actually themselves looking at becoming more OneOffice centric, so they can actually then help their clients become that way, because many of them aren't. So break down the silos between the services you're selling or the products you're selling or building. That's the other thing to think about here. And then we can start to look at clients who are making that shift. And believe it or not, a lot of them who've outsourced quite heavily are in possibly a better position to do that, because they have a more disparate spread of people resources, partner resources, etc. I think the bigger challenge are those who have the very heavy shared services, GBS type setups, which are going through rampant change. When you think about most of these companies have 90% of these staff not even in the office now. They're now thinking very differently about how they manage those people. Do they even need them all? How are they judging them? It's much more on outcomes and less on inputs and things like that. I think there's a desire from many businesses now to really focus on the core and actually shrink it a little bit and look at more agile, dynamic partnerships to get things done. I actually believe that we will see a fairly interesting resurgence of outsourcing after COVID, and it's not going to be all the type of outsourcing we saw before it. So that's another thing to expect, but it's a shift in mindset. And we are doing a maturity model that Don was talking about, where it's how are you maturing your people and your talent to engage them in a more digital fluent model? How are you taking on more common outcomes, more common purposes, more common values across your teams? How are you breaking down divisions between areas? That's the most important thing. And then having process change that run right across your customer to your employee, and how you sort of go to market this way. So we're sort of bringing out enterprises who are moving down this path. I don't think anyone is truly there. Those who are truly there tends to be ones who are not in the global 2000, who a sort of digital native to start with, and they think this way to start with. And it's getting to that mindset, getting to that we operate differently. People focus very much on maybe different skills, communication skills, empathetic skills that they had before as well. So I think the answer to that is we're going to be sharing lots of examples over the course of next year. I think each industry is slightly different in how the mindset is shifting. They have different value chains, different needs, different types of services and products to get to market, and they're being redefined. But as I keep saying, it's that ability to unify outcomes, operate in a model where data is the strategy. Getting the right data is the strategy for any business. Automation is the way to get that data by moving processes into the cloud in a way that are designed to get to the data. And then bringing it together in the right business model that makes the most sense. And we've been pushing this hard. We're going to keep very focused on how industries are making that shift. And the technologies are all in a horizontal fashion there to enable the change. But ultimately, the change comes from the mindset to start operating in this way. And we can't tell you how many clients we talk to. Their eyes light up when we talk about OneOffice, and that's us. That's how we really want to operate as we move forward. So I think that was the main question I got from a few people. We'll try and answer a few more offline because we are ridiculously over time at this point. We will also make this deck available and send it to everybody who joined today. So thank you very much for your time. And we'll be back in the new year with lots of exciting topics to talk about. We're going to be doing a big roundtable that's broadcast to the industry as well, and also unveiling our first digital industry conference later next spring. So thank you all again. I hope you all unplug, get some rest, get some mental rest as well over the holiday period, and enjoy a great new year. And I'm looking forward to celebrating the end of 2020 and the beginning of I think a more prosperous and happy and maybe less uncertain year for all of us in 2021. Thank you, my colleagues, my analyst colleagues. You know who you all are. And thank you, everybody, for taking the time to listen to us. So God bless you all.